Hey, Redcasters, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Go Big Red.
We're moving to the dorms today, so I'm very fired up to be with these guys as we start this training camp. What I will say is just I hope that people have the opportunity to come on Saturday night and come to practice. I certainly understand that being charged to come to a practice, spending $25 is different, and it's new. I think the one thing we've tried to do is not charge for anything that used to be free, right? We're not charging for fan days. We're not doing that. And I think if you look at our track record between camps and clinics and all these things, we've tried to be as available, and we'll continue to do that. But moving forward in this new model, we have to find ways, to raise revenue and to support 1890. They've gone above and beyond, and this is a great way to do that and support our roster, support our student athletes. And just so everybody knows, every player's parent, Julie is planning on coming. My wife Julie's coming Saturday night. She's paying $25. It's a fundraiser. And so if you can't come, we certainly understand. It will be a good practice. I want people to see the way that we practice, and at the end, we'll have some fun. We'll make it a fun, interactive, well, maybe not interactive, but a fun deal.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast, the Husker Fan Sports Show.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast, Matt's Rule Edition.
Matt's Rule Edition.
How you doing, Mac?
I'm good. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. It's been a little while since we've done. We've taken some time off in the off season.
Recharged our batteries.
Yeah.
Kept the fire going for the Husker knowledge and everything like that. So it's going to be nice being able to unpack some of the stuff I haven't been able to talk to you about. So.
Yeah.
And we have somebody with us.
We do. We have somebody with us. But I do want to mention that at that intro there, Saturday night, 6:30 is the practice, or 6 or 6:30. But the practice that's going on out there, $25 a head. Get in here, Husker fans. Come to Lincoln. Let's get as many people, as many thousands, if not tens of thousands of people.
That would be crazy.
All that money goes towards NIL. It is a fundraiser, as Coach Rule said there. Let's do it. But we've got someone else here tonight.
Yes, we do.
And our guest tonight is joining us on his 7th preseason Redcast episode, dating back to 2018. Over the past 10 seasons, his publication Pick Six Previews has been rated the #1 most accurate in the nation by Statson.com, and this year added the Triple Crown winner for accuracy ratings over a 10-year, a 5-year, and a 3-year interval.
Holy hell.
He's also a Heisman voter, member of the All-American Committee, as well as the Football Writers Association of America. Welcome back to the Redcast, Brett Ciancia of Pick Six Previews.
Dang, dude, you're like...
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate that intro. I mean, it got me thinking. I think you guys were one of the first ones to have me on your show back in 2018. So that was before we had the hard copy magazine. So really appreciate you throwing me the first invite there. And good to be back talking Husker football. It's a dedicated fan base. Yeah, there's the hard copy. Thanks for showing that off. A lot of change in the sport this year. We have the super conferences coming in, the expanded playoff bracket, and all the transfers you could ever ask for. So excited to break it down with you guys.
Yeah, and also Redcasters and Husker fans out there during the season, you'll be able to catch Brett every Friday on 1620 with Gary Sharp during the season?
Yeah, Football Fridays with Gary Sharp. Great to be back on 1620. Hey, I try and find the most passionate fan base, and so Nebraska fans are always showing up and listening, and really appreciate all the engagement with them. So I'll be there every Friday.
It's time well spent. Yeah, that's a good ROI on that one. I bet you there's a lot of interaction from the Huskers. I know that.
Brett, I think you're just trying to give us a good segue here, and let's just get into your magazine, and let's, as we do every year with you, let's start at a national level, and then we're going to work our way back to the kind of the conference level, to the Big Ten, and we'll finish up with Husker stuff. So any of the people that are watching Chasing 3 right now, because we're going head to head with that, when that's done, people can be coming over to us and catching us with the Huskers. But we've already got almost 300 people right now watching this live. Thank you so much, Redcasters.
That's cool.
This is awesome. Stick with us here. You can watch Chasing 3 after this. So, as Brett said, Husker fans are a little nutty. We're a little crazy, and we love to show up, and part of that's being a blue blood. Yeah. And I love something you do, and I want you to explain it again like you have every year, Brett. But there's some confusion, I think, on social media about what a blue blood is. Is Nebraska a blue blood? Because
especially when they see us on there, these young kids are like, Nebraska, what the hell?
We've lost some football games last year. We're not a blue blood. But every year you do this, and every year we come out in the top 8 there with the blue blood. So can you explain what your process is and why we all agree with this, that Nebraska
and why it's right
and why it's correct? Tell us, Brett.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is one of those off-season debates that always sparks up in January or February when there's not much going on. And I figured, hey, let's do a law of large numbers here. Let's put a poll out there and get 150,000 people involved. That's how many votes we had this year. But I do basic yes, no answers. Is Alabama a blue blood? Yes or no? Is Ohio State a blue blood? Yes or no? And then let the votes come in. And 150,000 votes again this year. You'll probably get 150,000 different definitions of what a blue blood is. But I think the consensus is really, a championship program over several generations that have been, the face of the sport at one time or the other, and have been consistent through the decades. Big fan bases, big stadiums, just real big brands in college football. And you see that across these same 8 schools every year. So despite the different national champions from Georgia, maybe some of the decline recently of Nebraska, it's still the same 8 every single year. So you mentioned it, 7 straight poll, and all 7 years have the same 8 here. And there's a huge drop off, not shown on the graphic here, a huge drop off down to 9th place. And it's like that every year. It falls all the way to like 45% or 40%. And those tend to fluctuate down there, but it's a clear top 8. And I think that speaks volumes to Nebraska having the staying power in a poll like this, given it's probably the worst decade of Husker football in program history, definitely the worst 5 years ever in Nebraska history. So to withstand something like that, I think it's impressive. You still have the national respect, and it reflects itself in anything fan related. I mean, the sellout streak, even I saw last week, a bunch of Husker fans showed up on a recruit's official visit. And that you don't see that. You don't see that elsewhere. So very impressive. And, these blue bloods, it's cyclical, guys. College football is cyclical. Maybe the cycle has been a little longer than you'd like, down cycle, but look at this just on the list. Notre Dame bounced back and made the playoff a couple of times. Texas just made the playoff. USC hired a great coach and had a Heisman winner. So, it ebbs and flows. Michigan there just rose to the top. So, we'll see about this year, but I think Nebraska is positioned well in this new era.
Yeah, I think of Michigan, that just a few years ago, they had lost, 16 out of 17 to Ohio State. They weren't competitive in that huge game. They had some bad seasons along the way, but it's the right coach and doing the right things. But Mac, one of the things that stands out to me too here is, as Brett, alluded to at the beginning of this is a changing college football world yet again. We're part of this in the Big Ten with the 4 new teams that joined us. But look at the conferences represented on this blue blood list. USC is now in the Big Ten with Nebraska, with Michigan, with Ohio State. 4 of the 8 are from the Big Ten. Oklahoma and Texas now in the SEC with Alabama. 3 of them are that. And then Notre Dame is in the ACC where, we could easily see some change happening in the next few years, you'd imagine.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And I think that Nebraska in this new era, that's the NIL era, I think they're positioned pretty well. I say that because now the fan base has an even more active role in talent acquisition, in the roster building. Love it or hate it, it's just the reality. So with such a passionate base, and you open up the clip here with a new fundraiser opportunity, it seems like fan involvement is going to go even further than ever. So that benefits programs like Nebraska, where that's the top attribute, I think, is the fan loyalty. So we'll see about this new era, but I think they're positioned well.
You've said that forever, Mac.
Yeah, I've always thought, I'm like, why don't they just open up a practice and charge us? I've never understood. Like, we would all go. I mean, I wasn't expecting. At the time, it wasn't NIL, but like $5, $6, whatever. That'd be a great afternoon. I mean, I understand why they don't open up practice in some respects, but just have the option every now and then. This is a no-brainer. I'd be curious because I know it's going to be hot. But I'd be curious to see what we pull in.
We'll see. I mean, we have reference.
It's a great idea. It's a layup.
I mean, in spring ball, you have spring game where Nebraska is traditionally in that 50 to 75,000 range, give or take the year and give or take the construction going on. We had a couple of years back during a hot Friday night. There was a Friday Night Lights back when Riley was coach, and I think that was one of the years where Keyshawn Johnson Jr. was here. And there were 7 or 8, or maybe even 10,000 people on a hot Friday night just to watch high school kids run around and throw passes. So this is a good example.
We get gassed up.
We really do. And we're excited. So I love that gets reflected in the blue blood poll that you have there every year, Brett.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, if we continue on here now through the magazine, and this is the national stuff here. So let's start off with the Pick Six playoff predictions. Your top four, you have Georgia, Ohio State, Miami, and Utah, and then rounding out the rest of the 12: Penn State, Notre Dame, Boise State, Texas, Florida State, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oregon. Mac and I did a little bit of the conference breakdown again beforehand, and with Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State representing the Big 10, that's 3 teams. The SEC is represented by 4: Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, and now Texas. There was a couple of ACC teams in there, or 3 of them, if you consider Notre Dame ACC, Florida State, and Miami. And then the Big 12 now has Utah, and then there's Boise State. So, Brett, talk to us about this. How'd you kind of come up with this list here, 12?
Yeah, well, this is one of the big features this year is the expanded bracket is tripled in size from the old 4-team bracket to 12. The keys here are the automatic buys for the conference winners. And at the top, it's a little bit of chalk, but Georgia and Ohio State coming out of the SEC and the Big 10. These two have really emerged as superpower programs and rosters this year. Usually these dynasty tier teams send a lot more to the pros. They cycle through their roster quicker. But for whatever reason, these two are bringing a lot back this year. And then they sprinkled on another top 5 recruiting class. And this year in the book, too, I put in transfer rankings and mock NFL, the 2025 consensus mock number of drafted players coming up the next cycle. And these are number 1 and number 2 in the mock draft again. So in a year where you're going to have to win 15 or 16 games, I think depth is going to go a long way. And, there's actually a prop in Vegas right now. It's Georgia and Ohio State versus the field to win it all. And I'm actually leaning Georgia and Ohio State. That's how far they've distanced themselves. It's about 50-50 odds. So it is a decided gap at the top. From there, I have Utah winning a crowded Big 12. We can talk more about that. And ACC, Miami is kind of the shock pick this year. I have them winning the ACC in a 3-team race over Florida State and Clemson. I like more from Miami than the transitional Florida State and the anti-transfer Clemson. It's going to set them back a ways that it already has. From there, another feature this year is the first round are on campus. So as you can see on screen, or if you're listening, we have Florida State going to Oxford, Mississippi to play Ole Miss, Alabama heading up to Autzen to play Oregon.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, Penn State going to South Bend to play Notre Dame. How cool would that be? And then Boise State gets the non-AQ bid this year playing in Texas. So that's the 12. There's so many different variables and factors here to discuss. Curious where you guys want to take it.
Yeah, well, let's start kind of breaking it down by conference. And, let's start with the SEC, the team that has the most in here, the 4. You mentioned Georgia has separated itself, and they have the last few years. So even with this being 12 teams, even with the potential parity that NIL and the portal is creating across college football, is there still a huge gap at the very high level that we're talking I've always kind of said, between number 7 and 50, there's almost parity sometimes. Nebraska could be number 50, but we'll play number 7 to a 1-point loss. But it seems like there's this top 3, 4, 5 teams in the country that there's a gap between them and that 6th and the 7th. And it's hard for teams to crack that. The last few years, Michigan's cracked it. Washington at least got into it for 1 year. TCU did, but no one thinks they're really a top 5 team. So at that very high level, that Georgia level, the Ohio State level, I mean, is there a huge gap still after them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think Georgia really is. You can put them at the top of the sport right now. And, back-to-back champs in 21 and 22. I'm not so sure they weren't the best team again last year. My game grader formula had them number 1, despite not making the playoff bracket. And they were a field goal away from the Bama in the SEC title. But had this been an expanded bracket last year, I think Georgia would have been the odds-on favorite to take another one home. And, it's just the difference between these dynasty tier teams, like I call them. It's just the 5 stars at every position. At Nebraska, it was huge news, and rightfully so, to get Dylan Raiola, the 5-star quarterback. But then when you review a team like Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State, it's like every position group has multiple 5 stars. It's just a whole different tier that they've unlocked. So that's why they're at the top. That's why they're the odds-on favorites. And also, I mentioned this a little bit, depth, high-quality depth is going to be even more important this year. Yeah. It's going to be harder for a Cinderella team. Think of a TCU or a Washington the last couple of years that made it through one playoff game, but then couldn't bring it home in the second round. That was the national title. Now think of them having to do that 4 times against giants every round. It's just not going to happen. So people think that this is adding more parity. And yes, you see more logos on the screen and logos in the bracket, and it'll be really cool the first 2 rounds. But I think when the dust settles, it's going to be your dynasty still competing for national titles.
I mean, there's just no way around that. I don't think.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, I'd love for it to be
off,
wrong. Yeah,
but you can't play off your way out of super teams. Not in today's college football. You know, when you've got elite recruiters you can pay whatever they want, and an NIL where you can pay a kid whatever you want. It's ridiculous, you know, to think that like there's going to be some programs that are just always going to be successful at that, and that's fine because it almost completely maps onto the aforementioned blue blood list, right? It's like nothing changes. We shifted the numbers. We did a little hocus pocus. Everybody gets paid. Same teams win. You know?
Yeah.
It might give somebody like us, like Nebraska, a chance because despite our records in these past few years, the passion never went anywhere. The program was relatively well managed money wise. We were able to put new facilities together, so there was always like stuff building in the background. And when the shift happens, it kind of favors us. But like in the end of the day, it'd just be interesting. There's once you become a magnet for pro prospects to go to, it's very hard to lose that.
Well, that's where that's where getting guys like John Butler at the DB's coach, having Rule with his experience there. I mean, that can help with some of the trying to attract pro athletes, or at least sell the NFL to them. But I'm interested, Brett, with, as you mentioned, this is an expanded playoff, the first year of it, 12 teams. How does this affect, do you think, scheduling moving forward? We've heard various different models where people are saying stick away from, don't schedule too hard in the non-conference, where we want to see, like if we had Boomer on the show right now, Boomer, we want to watch P4 versus P4 games. If we could watch 12 a year, we would. Does this promote more of that because you have a chance to get into this even if you have more losses? Or do you see teams pushing away and scheduling easy for kind of doing what Michigan did a year ago in the non-conference and, just try to do well in conference?
Yeah, well, not to take the negative angle here, but I think people are dreaming if they think that it's going to be even more matchups. It's going to be less because people realize how big a grind it is now. You got to go through super conferences. These aren't the ACC Coastal anymore. You got super conferences and then a guaranteed 1 versus 2 conference title game. There's no easier division winners that might sneak in there. Right. So you got to grind there, and then you got to win 3 playoff games against giants, or maybe even 4 if you're runner up. So, and I think what we've seen in past years and almost the whole course of college football history from the committee and the AP poll is a lot of loss counting. And I say that looking at undefeated, 1 loss, 2 loss, I think that's going to be the group that's considered for a playoff bid. I just don't see them considering an 8-4 or a 9-3 that, they played a lot of tough teams, so they should be rewarded. I don't see that happening. So it's going to be loss counting. Yeah, it's going to be loss counting again. And, you don't want to kill your team by going against 12 Power Fives and, a 13th game against a conference title and then 4 playoff games. It's just not going to happen. So, I've always been critical of the playoff expansion. I think there's some positives to it for sure, but there's some cons. I think you're going to get ready for a lot of rematches in conference title games and in the playoff bracket. And then what was the other thing? The number of mulligans goes up, but that could be good or bad.
That's a good point, though, Brett. You've mentioned this. You've been a strong opponent of, over the years, of expanding the playoff. Even probably, I guess when we went back to even the original playoff of going to 4, were you against that at that time? Or what's your take kind of along the way has always been the kind of the sanctity of the season and not to water it down. Do you feel like that's happening?
Well, I've loved the 12 or 13 fall Saturdays. I thought that's what really makes college football stand out. And, the do or die, the all chips are in, whatever phrase you want to say about it, all the stakes in these games in October and November. Think of the kick 6 or some of these old Ohio State, Michigan games where the winner's in, the loser's out. So I love that feature. I thought that 4 was perfect. I thought that with 2, you still have the risk. You run a risk of having too many undefeated teams and one being excluded, like it happened in 2004 with Auburn. It would have actually been a problem this year with multiple undefeateds. Someone would have been left out. So I've always loved 4, but I did not like the selection process. That's why I think a lot of people are okay with the number 4. It's just they didn't like the committee being behind closed doors and being scattered logic every week and kind of corporate and affiliated with conferences and all that. So I had always advised for 4, but then to also do a BCS formula. So something where it's partially AP, because you have more voters. It's like 100-something voters scattered across the country, partially AP, partially computer, whatever other metrics. But at least it's agreed upon, and it's a formula, and it's transparent. Unlike what happened to Florida State last year, that's the perfect example where 4 might have been okay, but the process was terrible. So
yeah, that was ridiculous.
Yeah. So long story short, I've always loved 4 as the number, but the BCS selection process. And I just really hope, the perfect example this year is Ohio State, Oregon. It's coming up mid-season. This, if Georgia loses an early season game, this might be number 1 versus number 2. And it just doesn't seem to have the same impact as it would have, because in my head, I'm thinking, okay, this is round 1 of 2, maybe even round 1 of 3 if they get paired up in the bracket. So it just doesn't have the same do or die feel to it. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm rambling here, it's a big topic, but
dude,
the last thing I'll say is, to be fair to the other side, it does bring some more importance to teams that are ranked, say, 15th through 10th down the stretch in November. Teams that already have their second loss and they're now in do or die mode to get into that conference title to get the auto bid. So you pick up something on the back end there. I just think at the top of the sport, those really critical game of the century, as we used to call them, I think those are now losing a lot of value.
I think one thing that potentially can come out of this, you mentioned in your rankings here, having the game with Alabama going to Oregon. At the very least, one positive that has come out of this is if they're going to 12 teams, have some games being played at the home stadiums on campus in inclement weather, if that's what it takes. I mean, Mac, you're a Packer fan, and Brett, you're up there in New Jersey, so I mean, you're familiar with some cold weather NFL games, and we think of the Bills and we think of the Patriots and some of the great games that are being played there. The idea, the concept of a Southern school, an SEC school, having to go up to Autzen, or knock on wood here, if we can get this thing rolling here, coming up to Lincoln, Nebraska, or Madison, or Ann Arbor, wherever it is. The idea of these teams playing north of the Mason-Dixon line once in a while is really valuable. We saw it last year. Florida played their opener at Utah, and I think it was the first time in 30-plus seasons they had left the state of Florida to play a non-conference game. So, that's enjoyable on our end as Northern fans. It's nice to see that at least being one positive outcome, I think, of this new setup.
I do agree with you totally, though, and I would have disagreed with you and Boomer about who to schedule in the non-con, because I don't care if they're puff cakes or not. I really don't. For me, you know what I'm saying? Get your team right. It's just so much of a slog. It's just such a slog. This conference is going to be murderer's row all the time.
I'm a big fan of the scheduling of one. First off, I'm a fan of 9 conference games, 1 P4 non-conference game, and then 2. I don't care who you have. You can have.
I don't care.
Northern.
I wouldn't care if it's 8 or 9 if it was the same.
No. My point is, I'm in favor of 9 conference games and then 1 non-conference big opponent, and then 2 just gimme games. Okay. The problem with that is that you don't have consistency. The SEC still plays 4 non-conference games, and then some
folks have sense not to schedule a big.
Well,
I would never do that.
It just creates an inconsistency, and then they're rewarded. And Michigan last year is the perfect example of why, even though I love seeing Nebraska, Colorado play, you're rewarded by not playing that. We're scheduled to play Tennessee in the next couple of years, a game that's been kicked back already a decade. And the likelihood of us ever playing Tennessee probably isn't going to happen, to be honest with you. That's probably going to get canceled. The SEC's canceled other games.
The only way you're rewarded is that you don't have a loss there where maybe you could have. But if you get to the playoff or playoff situation, then you've had a good season. You've beaten good teams.
No. What I'm getting at is that Michigan was rewarded. Now, Michigan won all their games, but they were rewarded by not playing any Power 4 conference, non-conference games last year.
Yeah, so what that did is it built in more margin of victory, another mulligan for them, where had they scheduled a Texas or a Bama and taken an early loss, then they don't get that second mulligan last year. But it's a moot point. They went undefeated and earned it. But had they finished as a 12-1, then it gets a little interesting. But I don't know. I think you're right about it. The Big Ten being such a grind now. I mean, you have so many tough programs. It's weird to rank somebody 7th, 8th, 9th in this league without divisions. It's just it's
wild. As a fan, just to be clear, I'd like to see the big games too. I'm just thinking practically, I just don't see them doing that anymore.
Well, and there's going to be big games all the time because of the way that the conference has spread out. I mean, you just mentioned it, Brett, the strength of the conference. Here's your Pick 6 rankings, Power 4, and we did your top 30. out of 70 here. Nebraska's 33. You are still very kind to Nebraska, even after the losses. We're still in the top half of it. And the teams in red here are Big Ten teams. So Ohio State number 2, Oregon number 3, Penn State number 7, Michigan number 12, Iowa 20, USC 22, and then you have us as the 7th out of 18 teams right now in the Big 12 or Big 10. You have us at number 33. So to your point there, Brett, about a lot of strength in the conference. I mean, just by nature of being in this conference, you're already going to be playing a lot of these teams anyways. But I guess let's pivot here to this Power 4 and your Pick 6 rankings. Kind of go through them. What you mentioned earlier, Georgia being in a class kind of their own, them in Ohio State, so you have them 1 and 2. But how do you break the rest of this top 30 out?
Yeah, well, those are the top 2. The leader from the pack from there for the race for third I have is Oregon. This is a team that they built it the right way. They built it from the trenches out under Mario Cristobal and now continued by Dan Lanning. And what stood out with them is the talent acquisition. They're the only team in the country with top 10 high school recruiting classes back-to-back and top 10 transfer back-to-back. So they're stacking that roster. The only question I had with them was the loss of Bo Nix, but then the next day they went and signed Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. So you have a Heisman candidate already at quarterback. So I like Oregon there as number 3.
That's pretty nifty.
Yeah. No,
that's a good move. You can do it.
He's doing really well up there with talent acquisition, and it puts Oregon into a higher tier than they've ever been.
Sure.
So then Ole Miss, what stands out with them is they don't recruit well from the high school ranks within their conference. They're 25th nationally, but that's like 12th or 13th in the SEC. What Lane Kiffin has been able to do is dominate the transfer portal. He calls himself the portal king, and they've landed 20 4- and 5-star players the last 2 cycles. So
wow,
incredible acquisition from the portal. So that's actually something to watch if you're a Nebraska fan, is that strategy, because just given the location of Nebraska on the map, I don't know that they'll ever be a top 5 recruiter annually.
Right.
That's fair to say. But I think through the transfer portal, you can make up some ground like Ole Miss has. So I don't know. It's just something to watch. It's definitely a new experiment happening there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then just jumping around a little bit, you see that Utah and Miami check in 8 and 10. You'll notice on my playoff bracket, they're the 3 and the 4 seed. That's because the playoff will reseed for the 4 automatic conference winners. So I don't think Miami's number 4 in the country per se.
Right.
Win their weaker conference and get that bid.
Mm-hmm.
What else we have? Michigan fell off a little bit, losing something like 16 starters off their national title roster down there at 12th. They're the last team looking in for me for the playoff. But a lot here. Where else do you guys want to take it?
As far as the teams coming into the Big Ten that you have on here, Oregon and USC, any concerns or potential concerns you have about how they have to adjust to the Big Ten? Or, I mean, their schedules aren't terrible, or maybe I haven't looked at them that close, but did that make it kind of difficult? I mean, as you're putting these magazines together, Brett, these conferences are literally realigning underneath you, which kind of has to change how you predict some of the way that the season's going to go, because they haven't faced these defenses or been in these stadiums. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How much do you have to factor that in when you do this, man?
It was another added variable this year, as if it couldn't get any more complex. You have all the transfers, and it got even more wild with these conference realignment. But I guess it helps in a way, because I already cover these teams, so it's now just I'm comparing apples to apples. Unlike whatever. But how do they fare in their new conference? I thought you were going to drop a Scott Frost line in there about how the new conference will have to adapt to me. And
it rang a little bit in my ears too as I was saying it, and I wonder.
But,
good catch.
No, but I think Oregon, without even trying to, I think they've kind of built as a Big Ten program in the last couple of years. Like I mentioned, with their trenches, their lines are really beefed up and strong, and they might win the Joe Moore Award this year for the top offensive line. They were 2nd or 3rd last year in that category. So they're really ready for the Big Ten transition. USC, I'm not so sure about, because that's kind of the finesse style that you see in the Pac-12 and the Big 12. Right. It's going to be a great offense again, even though they lose the Heisman winner, Caleb Williams. The big questions on defense for them. And what I do like is that Lincoln Riley, he moved on as a coach. He moved on from Alex Grinch, his longtime coordinator, and not just one, but he brought in 3 experienced minds on defense. Danton Lynn from UCLA, the coordinator, Matt Entz, the head coach from North Dakota State, and Houston's coordinator. So it's 3 pairs of eyes now, fresh eyes on this roster. Sure. I think that they'll get some adequate play on defense and be more of a balanced team. So that's how I think those two will fare. The other two are going through complete transitions.
Right.
Washington, not shown here on the graphic, despite being in the national title, they lose 20 out of 22 starters off that title team and a head coaching change. So,
yeah.
They were dealt no favors in the scheduling. We'll talk about that when we get to the Big Ten. But so that's how I think they fare. Oregon looks like a legit Big Ten team and really a super team ready to compete. USC has to clean their defense up, but I think they're on the path to do so.
You know, Brett, I think you make a great point there about Oregon being ready for the Big Ten transition, that they've been building their trenches up over the course of the last few years while they're still in the Pac-12. I go back to Pelini and the transition. Nebraska knows all too well what it's like to transition conferences, and Bo was slow defensively to transition the dollar defense that works so well, the 7 DBs on the field, the peso against the Big 12 teams that did so well against those spread. By the time, people forget, they think that we got into the Big 12 or Big 10 and we just started struggling. We won 9 or 10 games every year the first 4 seasons in the Big 10 with Bo. But the transition defensively, he did not build up the front 7 fast enough. And so we played that Wisconsin game in the second season. We're playing Wisconsin for the championship. Already made the championship game, but we were down. Baker Steinkriller gets hurt. We literally don't have a defensive tackle. We are starting Cameron Meredith, a 245-pound D end at D tackle, because we did not build up the trenches. We were not, and that was 2 seasons into the conference,
which is a little inexcusable on the coach's side.
It is. That's not the roster management piece of it. So to your point there about if I was going to try to put a chink in the armor here, Brett, and say I'm going to question Oregon, I don't think they should be number 3. They're making this huge transition. I am actually agreeing with you, because I think you're absolutely right. They've readied themselves for this transition already over the course of the last couple of years with what they've done in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look defensively, talking defense, all 11 of their projected starters are 4 or 5 stars. It's fully stocked everywhere. We mentioned Dillon Gabriel. They even have Dante Moore coming in, a 5-star quarterback from UCLA. So even if something happens to Gabriel, they have the built-in insurance of another 5-star. So I think they're fully loaded. I'm not worried about the transition. Now for UCLA, USC, more questions there, and Washington, a total transition. So I agree with you.
So we're going to start transitioning here now to Big Ten talk in a second, but we're sitting here at almost 1,000 live viewers, and I'm really pleasantly impressed with this, considering that we went head to head with Chasing 3, the Huskers live show that they went live tonight, 8:15. I'm quite happy with that. Redcasters, we've got Boomer working the back end here. If anybody has any questions, we have a national pundit here. We have somebody who's a Heisman voter. We have somebody who does the number 1 predictor in college football with us. If you have questions, do not hesitate to throw them in there. And
just be careful.
Boomer will
give you the answers. He's a numbers guy,
and they may not be the answers you like always, but that's all right too. But let's talk a little Big Ten.
Dave just had one.
Dave, hate to say it, Iowa has a favorable schedule. What has to happen for them to get into the playoffs? I guess maybe that's a segue there, because that's still talking national, and it's transitioning to the Big Ten.
Trying to control
Boomer, post that one again here, and let's ask that to Brett. So Brett, Iowa's our nemesis, but they have a favorable schedule. They have I think it was the number 1 most defense heavy defense in the country on according to Pick 6 previews there. What do they need to do to get into the playoffs? And hopefully they don't.
Well, great question, Dave. And I'm glad you touched on Iowa. Not to anger any Husker fans here, but they're one of my best bets of the whole year for win total. They opened up at 7.5 was their number, and that was just automatic for me. I mean, you look at their schedule, easiest Big Ten draw in the conference. They only draw 1 of the top 6. So right away, that's a built-in schedule boost. I think they're going to be favored in 8, 9, 10, maybe even 11 games. Obviously, the road trip to Ohio State will be a loss for them. Defensively, everything's back except for Cooper DeJean. They did a really nice job with their NIL, the Swarm NIL, to retain a lot of top players, keep them from other programs and from the pros. 4 defensive All-Americans for me. And the big question is offensively. Can they get any kind of production from that offense? It's at least veteran. I think 4 offensive linemen are back, and they finally have a Power 5 quarterback there, a new fresh set of eyes, a coordinator with Tim Lester, who's had experience in the past building good offenses. So, I love Iowa's formula. I know that a lot of national guys like to mock it, and it becomes a punchline, like a lazy punchline. I actually really respect it. They know how to grind out W's, and it's just fascinating to watch. But I think it's good for at least that 7.5 wins. That's the easy bet. Playoffs, that'll be tough. Now you got to do some loss counting, like we talked about. If they finish 10-2, they'll be in the discussion. As crazy as it sounds, they'll be in the discussion at 10-2.
Well, that's a question I'm going to have for you a little later as we talk about Nebraska. And I'm jumping a lot there, but
so what I hear
10-2 is an interesting number to me.
So what I hear is you're talking about a team that's probably going to come in way overconfident and be subject for upsets left and right. That's what I'm hearing. I heard what you said,
Brett.
When it came through, it was Iowa set up for a colossal failure.
One of the coaches that you've talked to many coaches over the course of the offseason that they're all listed in here. I mentioned Tony White, the defense coordinator in Nebraska. You've talked to. We'll talk about that later. But Kirk Ferentz is one of the head coaches you've talked to. What did Kirk have to say this offseason about the Hawkeyes?
Yeah, Kirk was one of my favorite interviews of all time. It really, you wouldn't expect it from the guy, but he was really engaging. Had some good one-liners, even like, some of the questions he's always asked about points per game and yards per game from the offense. His reply is always, "Hey, my best stat is wins per game." He can grind out wins. He knows how to do it. He has the Big Ten West formula. So he was refreshing to talk to. I really enjoyed it, and find myself pulling for him and that style of play, because that style of play seems to have gone away. I mean, that's really an old-fashioned style where it's defense, it's special teams, it's field position, it's coffin corner punts. They have a knack for getting safeties and block kicks. It's really cool to watch, and I know that might hurt some Husker fans to hear, but it's just, So I have a lot of respect for what they're doing there. Now, offensively, it cannot get any worse. You look at my book, there's a lot of red on that page, and red signaling bottom 10 performance. So dead last in the country on offense. Let's see if they can get that up and running.
Well, I'll finish the Iowa thing here with we had Redcast Abby, who just joined us here. She's going to be part of the team. And so we're doing a little spin-off with her where she's going to do some of the sports that aren't football. She's going to join us on football as well, but she's going to do some of the non football sports with Huskers. We have a lot of interest in that. But she was at Big Ten Media Days last week, and she asked a question to Rule about, what did he learn in the first season, or if he could go back, what did he wish he would have known? And he specifically brought up Ferentz. He specifically brought up the wind and brought up Osborne in the same point too, that Osborne told him a year ago how important wind is in Nebraska in November, and just having a respect for how that can impact a game and impact the game in inches, in yards. And when Nebraska's lost the number of one score and close games that we've had, that is certainly something that Kirk Ferentz has learned over the years there at Iowa, and his wins per game, we can give him all the crud we can, but he's not wrong there. He's won a lot of games doing that. So
it affects corn pollination too, and that makes really sense. That makes sense why both states would be so concerned with it. And listen, there's a lot of things I do like about Iowa. I do like Kirk Ferentz, and I do like their kind of style of football. I even like their uniforms, but I just hate Iowa.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But I like a lot of the stuff about them. If we were in the same conference,
we've hit our Iowa allotment, Mac. We can't talk any more about them, or we're gonna start losing the 1,000 followers that we have following right now. Thank you so much.
Cheek. If they can't handle it, then I welcome their.
We've passed the 1,000 mark. Thank you so much, Redcasters, for following along. Again, we have Brett Ciancia Pick 6 previews with us, our annual preseason episode with him. And we've gone through now the national football. We've gone through the playoff predictions that he has, the blue blood rankings where Nebraska's strongly up there.
We're distilling it all down, man.
Absolutely. So let's get over to the Big Ten now. And we're going to finish with Husker football after that. Big Ten here, Brett. We have your Pick 6 preview standing predictions. And let's just start with the positive for Nebraska. There are 2 columns here, and we're on the left side, the good side of it. There's 18 teams now in conference, and Ohio State we've already mentioned at the top. And I'll start the conversation here, Brett, but you take it wherever you want. I look at Nebraska and I see a schedule where we start off playing in the conference. 3 of our first 4 teams are in the bottom 4 of your list: Illinois, Purdue, and Indiana. Our first 2 are only 2 away games, and the first 7 games are against the number 17 tied teams in this league. Or in your prediction here. And the only other team that we play in the first 4 games is against number 10 Rutgers. So we don't play anybody to start our first 4 conference games off. Nobody on that left side with us in that column.
That's true.
So there, I've at least kind of teed that up for you, Brett. take us through these predictions here and give us your Big Ten.
That's probably why we're on the left side of that column.
I hope. Go for it, Brett.
Yeah, that certainly helps. But I think this is more a testament to the transitional year that Matt Rule had last year, and specifically the defense. The Black Shirts were playing up to par with those old 2009, 2010. The Ndamukong Suh, the Amukamara teams, Levante David, those defenses. It felt the same. They were flying around the field. A great rush defense with really no help from the offense. So I was impressed by what he did in the transition year there. Now, you see a big boost from year 1 to year 2 under Matt Rule. That's just been what he's done at Temple and Baylor over the years, a great program builder. That was why Trev Alberts hired him, was for program building and player development. So I think you're going to see a jump here. For context, within the 18-team pool of teams, Nebraska was 13th last year in the same ranking in Game Grader. So I think they're going to shift up from 13th up to 7th. And I'd like to think of this. If people think that that's too high, just insert a 5-star quarterback into last year's team. How many of those November games are flipped? I mean, they were all by a score, and they were all turnover laden. I mean, it was a really rough offensive play. If you take out one turnover every game, or a field goal or two every game, it's probably 8-4, 7-5.
Well, we lost 4 games by a field goal or less. 3 of them were walk-off field goals, and a 5th game we lost in overtime, which
it's
basically
like you have that written down somewhere.
That's 5 of the 7 losses. And anybody that watched the Colorado game a year ago, I was at the Colorado game. We got blown out on the scoreboard because we turned the ball over 5 times, but physically dominated them. Had 8 sacks on Shadur. So. Really, the only game where we were outclassed was against the team that ended up winning the national championship. And I think Matt Rule made a point to reference that a number of times in the Big Ten media days is that, we were 5-7, but the difference between 5-7 and 10-2 at the very least is literally a play or two in some cases each game. And Brett, that's what hopefully the 5-star quarterback and the second year of Coach Rule can bring.
Yeah, I think that's the key boost because everywhere else on the roster, I see improvement year over year, or at least a second-year bonus from the coordinators. The running backs, really bad injury luck last year. Number 1 and number 2 both knocked out in the same game. People forget that. So they were on their 3rd back, and so you get both guys healthy. And the receiver core, they landed one of my all Big Ten, all transfer receivers coming in from Wake Forest with Banks. So an upgrade there. You have sprinter speed from the slot. Fedoni's healthy and looking like a machine. He landed on my All Big Ten second team.
Oh, nice.
And the offensive line, I mean, it's they're past due to return to where they used to be. I think they take a step forward here, very veteran squad. And, not to get too into the Nebraska preview, but that's why you see the big jump. And to take it back at the 10,000-foot view here, Ohio State and Oregon are super teams. Penn State has an elite defense and a great offensive coordinator hire with Kotelnicki. I think they're going to be a playoff team. Michigan loses so many starters and their head coach. I think they take a slide back.
Yeah.
Iowa has the schedule boost. Nebraska also a nice schedule too. That's why they got a little boost there.
For sure.
Sure.
And then what else? Washington, what a heck of a Big Ten welcome gift they drew. It was the hardest Big Ten schedule. I think it's 7 of the top 9 or something.
Wow.
There will be, and they're losing 20 starters. So they're due for a slide.
Personal.
Well, the team that's right behind us, you have number 8, Wisconsin. That's another one of the teams we haven't beaten in a while. Dave, Redcast Dave is Tyler Van Dyke an upgrade at QB for Whiskey?
He can be, and it's kind of a dodgy answer, but at his best, he's been really elite for Miami. He went through a little bit of a funk there in the back half of 2023. So I think that if he returns to where he's been, he's pretty sharp. So, and he's got a good coordinator there. I've always been a Phil Longo believer. He's able to put some offenses together. Second year bonus there for the coordinator change, going from the traditional Wisconsin ground pound offense to more of a spread. And they're packed with good receivers. The offensive line and defense have been down by their standards, but I think they're going to be a solid top 40 team. Could surprise some folks and move up the ladder a little bit, but they're far from their old Big Ten West heights.
The highest ranked team that we play in the first half of the season for us on your list is number 10, Rutgers, and we play them in Lincoln. I guess I saw something on Twitter about this, or
I hear they can be. I hear that one could be a problem.
I think it was Herb Street that said they had an outside shot at, was it a playoff or something? And maybe I just saw that wrong, but I've heard a lot of varying thoughts on Rutgers. What you're out there in New Jersey, Brett. What is Rutgers looking like here at number 10?
Well, Schiano's done it again. He's came back to New Jersey and rebuilt one of the worst programs in America. He did it during the Big East and AAC days, and left, now came back and rebuilt it again. And I think what you have with Rutgers is one of their best teams during the Big Ten era. They joined in 2014. This will be their best team they've had. And I think the Herbie comment and maybe some of the steam you're seeing on Rutgers recently, it's definitely a schedule play, because they're the only team in the Big Ten to avoid all top 5 teams. So it's definitely a schedule boost for them, definitely the easiest in the conference. With that said, it's not only schedule, it's a really strong defense. They were top 40 by my numbers on defense last year, bring almost everybody back there. They have a workhorse running back with Kyle Monangai, but really, really poor quarterback play, and I think that'll continue and really limit them. So despite a huge schedule boost, I think they'll be in contention for a bowl again, but I don't see them contending for the conference, much less the playoff.
Mm-hmm. Is Lincoln Riley, this is from Boomer, is Lincoln Riley able to do anything defensively at USC, and is their O-line ready for the Big Ten play?
Yeah, touched on their defense earlier, and I think it was a great coaching move to get rid of Alex Grinch. He's held them back for a while, and he hired 3 experienced coordinators, and in the case of Matt Entz, a head coach from North Dakota State. So a new set of eyes on a blue-chip roster. There's 5-star and 4-star talent everywhere. Right. They landed a couple guys on my all-Big Ten team, but 3 defenders on my all-transfer team, with Nate Clifton coming in from Vandy, Mascarenas Arnold, an all-conference guy from Oregon State, and Kamari Ramsey from UCLA. So really supplementing themselves from the portal. Great new coaches coming in. They're more of a balanced team. They'll take a step back on offense, but definitely some gains on defense.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe a way to kind of end the Big Ten chat here is, do we need to have, a little memorial, a little service for the West and the East? I mean, we had leaders and legends that lasted a couple of seasons, but East and West is done. And, for all the talk of the Iowas and the Wisconsins and the teams that have beat us, the West just was not competitive at all against the East when it came to actually winning titles, never won a single one. What are your parting shots and your final thoughts on the end of the West versus East, Brett?
Well, I've always been pro division. And again, this may seem like I'm just living in the past, but I like having divisions. I like having your established pool of teams to play each year. Your built-in rivalries come naturally. And you're all playing for a division title and a clear path to the conference title. Now, people make fun of the Big Ten West, the ACC Coastal, maybe the Big 12 or the Pac-12 South at times. Now, welcome to the era. The division era is gone. Now, welcome to the era of tiebreakers, because with so many teams in a conference and such scattered schedules, you're going to have a lot of teams tying with conference records. And people are going to get really sick of looking up tiebreaker rules, tiebreaker scenarios. You're going to have a bunch of 7-2 teams getting the last spot in the conference title. So I hate it going away from divisions. I've never had a problem with the Big Ten West. I know it's been a punchline for national guys to make fun of it. I think they're passionate fans. It's a different style of play, but that's what works up there. So I've always respected it, and I'll definitely miss it.
I appreciated the layout of the leaders versus legends. I think the names are stupid, but it was coming from the Big 12, where we had North versus South. And people, if you want to go back to 1996 when the Big 12 was formed, the northern schools were the strong football teams. The last year of the Big 8 in 95, Colorado, K-State, Kansas, Nebraska are all in the top 10. Okay, it wasn't the southern teams. But the inequity of North versus South was that the population, the large schools, A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, were all in the South. And so when the Big 12 was formed with Nebraska joining them, and they did the leaders versus legends, they were trying to do it with divisional equity built into it. And Nebraska was with, I think Michigan was in our side, and Ohio State and Penn State were on the other side. And it was this idea of trying to split up some things. Maybe it wasn't so geography based. It was more trying to have some equity of population, big schools, resources, all those things. And I thought that was a really well laid out division. And there were teams, by the way, during those 3 seasons, I think each division won at least one championship. It was, at the end of the day, the West got too much crap. Like we have, Jeffrey the Greek, and he's someone that I like interacting with, and he has a great show there, the Eyes on Big podcast. And we've talked about this, where the West wasn't a terrible division. It was just, at the end of the day, they just didn't win championships. And that hurt them as much as anything in the eyes of the national pundits. They never one time pulled off the Big Ten championship. And that probably now that it's over, now that there's no more division there,
Mhm.
that might be the telling ending, story for it.
I'm
And
curious what their bowl record was.
well,
Overall.
it was
That's a great point. Yeah, they played really
They
well in
did
bowls.
fine,
They were
yeah.
competitive. Yeah.
That's kind of what I
we,
thought.
we had more success at times against Eastern teams. We're 4-1 against Penn
Yeah.
State all the time. We can't beat Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. That's been Nebraska's problem. So
It is annoying because I think top to bottom, it was a better division. I mean, in terms of depth,
Mhm.
because you didn't have your Rutgers, your Indiana, your Maryland before Loxley was there. These were awful programs, and
Mhm.
so it brings back to like talking about division strength, conference strength. Like take the ACC. Yeah, they had Clemson winning national titles. Does Clemson's dynasty make the ACC inherently stronger than like the Big Ten, who hadn't won a title in 10 years? I don't think
Mhm.
so.
Right.
So
Right.
people get caught up just on that championship level. You got to go all the way down. So
yeah,
yeah,
Yep.
great point there. They dominated in bowl play and even, like you said, head-to-head interdivision. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
going to be a shame with the tiebreakers, guys, because at least with divisions, if it came to a tie, you had one game on the field head-to-head. So there will be situations where head-to-head isn't even a factor, and it's going to get real messy.
Mhm.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the tiebreaker scenario, but you're right. That's going to be another thing that annoys me when I watch, college football coverage. There's so many trends that I've just not fallen in love with, and now you brought up another one I hadn't even thought of. I'm like, tiebreaker talk. That sucks. I hate tiebreaker talk. It's like it's so.
You got a
But
little preview of it last year in the Big 12, if you recall. It was, but that was a 14-team league, and they had a bunch of teams there late November, and some of them hadn't played each other, and it got real messy. Oklahoma State ultimately won the tiebreaker there. But think of that was 14. Now you got 18-team
Right.
Big Ten,
Right.
17. It's even worse the ACC, I think, because it's 17 versus 18, but they have one less round of conference games. So 17
Mhm.
teams, 8 conference games there. It's going to be messy.
Yeah.
We're going to transition here to Nebraska, and we're going to
All
finish with the Huskers. But before, this is actually a really good question, Boomer. I think you posted this one here. Does the end of divisions make the path to the playoffs easier or tougher for Nebraska? And will a top 4 finish be enough in the conference if you're not Paul Feinbaum?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't even know how to approach that one, because you could think of in the West, if you made it to the conference title game and lost the title game, does that knock you out of the national bracket? So
Yeah.
one variable that we're not sure about yet is how the committee will value conference title losers in an expanded bracket. Of course,
sure.
in the old days, in a 4-teamer, the conference title loser would pretty much be out of contention. So like to lose on that last day of the calendar, it's tough to make it back in. So yeah, that's a really tough one. In terms of quantity per conference, I think it'll be the SEC and the Big Ten always competing for 4 or 3 in the bracket. It's the best
Mhm.
teams. They recruit the best. They send the most to the pros, and it's the best teams. So I think that on any given year, the Big Ten will get 4 or 3 in there. So
Yep.
I
And
guess your question is, can Nebraska break into the top 4 or top 3 of the conference? Most years, that should be enough to get in there.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that goes right back perfectly to this graphic here. This is your predictions this year. You have 3 of them from the Big Ten. You have 4 from the SEC, and any given year that could be vice versa, or, whatever. So no, I think that's an excellent point there. Well, Redcasters, we are almost at 1,200 live viewers right now. Thank you so much for sticking around here. We are now going to be going into the Husker preseason talk there with Brett Ciancia, pick 6 previews, national pundit here. The number 1 predictor, Heisman voter, All-American team. I mean, this is Brett, every single year. Love having you on here. It's so much fun. Earlier today, you were on the Bears show, right? Chris, was it
Chris Blaka?
Yeah. And you're also with BYU 960 AM. How do you keep all this stuff separated, and like you just go from like, okay, I'm gonna go from national with Bear to BYU, then talk with the Redcast. I mean, how do you do it?
Yeah, well, this is my crunch time. It's doing a preview magazine. It's really the best information, or I should say, my information is at its best nowadays. Before the season kicks off, it's really peak time. So June, July, August, you want to be reading about how your team's going to fare, how your conference opponents, the national landscape. So it's really the peak season for a preview magazine product. And that's why I try and hop around as much as I can during these few months here. It slows down a little bit during the season, but I try and go everywhere I can.
This is nice, though, too. It's your chance to shine, your chance to talk about all the stuff you've been learning about for the longest and promote your book. It's kind of, I'm sure it's a grind and everything like that, but it's got to be almost the funnest thing you get to do. All the work's done. You just get to talk about the product, and, you're talking about college football. So I'm sure it's a lot of labor of love kind of deal.
Yeah, exactly. It's the most rewarding time now that I've been through the months and months of research. Like I get invited on shows in January, February, March, and I just don't have anything to do then. I mean, I don't have anything to present. It's because I wait until I have the whole puzzle. I wait until I do all 70 teams. Then I start talking and comparing. So, yeah, it's definitely a little period here of 6-7 weeks crunch time. But no, I do any show I can, and I really appreciate you guys. Like I said at the top, one of the first shows that had me on back in 2018. That was before the hard copy. That was, Twitter was probably half the audience we have now. And it's grown from there. So, thank you guys for believing in me from the start.
Oh, yeah.
And thanks to all the Nebraska fans. I'm not just saying this because I'm on your show, but it's definitely the most, fanatical, the most loyal. You see it everywhere. You see it in Twitter polls. You see it on radio listens and, emails, everything. So it's just the number one fan base. So any chance I get to talk Husker football, I always love to, because I know it's people like me that care about college football.
I agree.
I might be based in a football dead zone here in the Northeast, where it's all NFC East rivalries and stuff like that. But that's why I try and find pockets of the country that love it like I do, and Nebraska's certainly at the top.
Oh, Brett, sure. I got to tell you, first off, the feelings are mutual, and right back at you. When we had you on, you had contacted me in 2018, and you're like, hey, you kind of told me what you were about, and we were fairly new at that time too. And I'm like, and you're like, can I be on your show? And we were literally only doing an audio podcast, a recorded one. And I'm like, I don't even know how to do. I don't know how to do an interview. I don't know how to. I don't technology wise. So I took my phone here.
Oh,
Go to Gregcast phone, and I had you on speakerphone, and I just had you up against the microphone. That's the only way I knew how to do it.
Yeah,
had no concept of how to actually technically even make it work. So
it's almost like being a pilgrim, having to rough it. It's like now I know what they feel like.
This is like the Oregon Trail. Yeah, people died of dysentery making our move.
I found a cup, and I put my phone on it.
Yeah, we tried to. We forded the river together, and
I made fire.
Look where we're at.
Yeah, it's kind of grown up together, so it's mutual respect there.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the Big Ten.
Yeah. Well, no, Nebraska.
I'm sorry. Let's get to Nebraska.
Let's shoot on.
And I think a good starting point here, and I'm going to show 2 slides in a row,
all right,
and then we'll take it back for a second. First one here is Pick 6 previews recruiting rankings, a 5-year average. Nebraska right there, number 19, top 20. This
nice.
is from a recruiting standpoint with good development and everything. This is a team that should be that's a playoff contending recruiting caliber. If you're number 19, give it, the right breaks, this season or that season, better. Even a 4-team playoff, you should be able to sniff a playoff if you're ranked 19th in recruiting. You don't see TCU up there. They played for a championship. You don't see Washington up there. They played for a championship. There's no reason Nebraska couldn't be sniffing playoffs with that level of recruiting, right? That's a 5-year average. So here's the problem. Whoa, Big Red. For the people listening, you don't get to see this slide. Whoa, Big Red. And I think you laid this out so perfectly, Brett. And I'm glad that you put analytics and stats to this. Is that you do 2 different stats here: a player development one and a win conversion one. We joked about Kirk Ferentz earlier, but win conversion. What's your winning? You win games. Out of 70 teams in the Power 4, we are 70th of 70 in your player development ratings. We are 70th out of 70 in win conversions. I think that's a good place to start from, because that's what Matt Rule has to fix. But let's start with that. What do those 70th out of 70 mean, Brett? And then what is Matt Rule doing to fix that?
Yeah, well, it's a big topic here. I mean, you start with the recruiting. I think that's the lifeblood of a program. It's definitely the starting point. I think other people might put too much emphasis on just the high school recruiting, because something's got to happen those 3, 4, 5 years that they're actually on campus. You got to have schemes that work, and you got to have a culture of player development, and now in the portal era, player retention. So the last couple of years, putting Nebraska down here dead last in both categories, as it turned out, it's not a knock on Matt Rule at all. Actually, these have a little bit of a lag to them. This is more a reflection of just how poor the Mike Riley era and the Scott Frost era were, where they recruited fine. I mean, top 20, top 25 every year. It's just that there was no translation to the win column and no translation to NFL draft day. That's what the 2 numbers are looking at. The win conversion compares your recruiting rank to the actual wins on the field. And then the player development compares your recruiting to the NFL draft stats. So both of those, I mean, it should be no surprise that Husker fans have really fallen off. Part of that has to do with coaching transition cycles where you lose players to the transfer portal. Otherwise, it's just been I mean, you guys have lived it. I don't have to tell you how poor it's been on campus there. One of the regimes there, just they ignored the squat rack, and maybe the other one didn't have schemes that worked. So you got to get that fixed. And that brings us to where we are now, because these are more of a lagging past, retroactive look. But now Trev Alberts, his main thing he wanted was a player developer, and other things like a grinder he quoted in saying, but player developer. And Matt Rule has that under his resume. He did it twice. He did it at Temple and at Baylor, and they have a lot less to start with than Nebraska has on campus, and a lot less potential than Nebraska has as a program. So with a higher starting point, I think you're going to see a higher result.
We started some of the conversation about this season for Nebraska predictions kind of based off of the schedule. And we can get to that. We can go back to the schedule. But I tend to not want to focus on who we play. I tend to want to focus on us and are we getting better? And you mentioned Alberts there as the AD. And I remember when he fired Frost, part of that press conference, he talked about the importance of in Nebraska, and just from a tradition standpoint, the Milt Tenopers, the history of all the Outland Awards and Lombardi Awards that we've won in the trenches, we've got to build the trenches up. And what I've seen in 25 or 20 some months of Rule being on campus, in both sides of the trenches, the offensive line, the defensive line, the amazing job they've done to not lose players that could have gone, that could have left. So they're treating players right. Whether it's NIL or whatever. We've had guys like Ben Scott on the O line, Bryce Benhart on the offensive line that could have gone on the D line, Nash, Hutmacher, and Ty Robinson. We're old. We are old in the line. We go back to what we talked about with like Oregon in the trenches. Are you going to do okay in the Big Ten? Getting old in the line is important. And then today, offensive coordinator Satterfield, he talked about how Nebraska's skill position depth this fall was more than he's ever had in his coaching career. So I'm starting to put those two things together on offense. I'm saying more depth at the skill position than we've had. And you couple that with we got old on the O-line, and we've got hundreds some starts or whatever on the O-line, just a ton of starts. And we have a 5-star quarterback who at least, and people are going to laugh, some Huskers, some fans, but he has to compete against at least a returning quarterback who went 5-2 last year. So I'm just saying across the board, the quarterback spot's better. We're old on the O-line, and we've got depth at the skill spots. That's a good place to start, isn't it, Brett?
Yeah, it's a great formula. And the second year bonus, I love looking at programs in their second year and third year, because it's given the coaches time to get their guys in there, or in the case of Nebraska, develop what was there. In Nebraska's case, both install their schemes. And now you're going to see a scheme like Tony White's 3-3-5. It's a different kind of defense, and it might need a year of fully adjusting. I mean, if that was the transition year last year, you're in for a really special year defensively here with so much of that back. But I just like my book. I go position by position. Nebraska at quarterback is an obvious upgrade. I mean, it was one of the worst quarterback performances in the country last year. Turnovers were terrible. The passing per game numbers, you all got to live it, unfortunately. But I think if you install a 5-star quarterback, and I watched the spring game, and I know that, it's just a spring game. People will laugh, but for the quarterback's sake, you saw him make every throw on the field. You saw the deep ball. You saw the touch pass in the corner of the end zone, quick shots. So I at least know you're going to get competent play. I really think so. And that's a huge
that'll go a long way.
And for what it's worth, I saw development from Harburg too, which, again, I'm not doubting Raiola being the starting quarterback. I'm not doubting that. But it's important to have improvement that shows development. The only quarterback that we can base development off of is someone who played a year ago. And to see somebody playing better now, Satterfield isn't the quarterback coach anymore now. Now we have a Thomas coaching quarterback. So if we're getting good development and we're recruiting 5-star guys on top of that, and we've got good competition going, that position should be markedly better. And that's the position that killed us last year, regardless of who played. It doesn't matter. There were so many turnovers.
Well, when you look at that player development too, one of the key factors as to why we were so low is because we had people transferring out all the time. And you get a 4-star, but he transfers right away. I mean, there's no, I don't know how's that factored into your rating. Maybe I shouldn't say this first, but
no, that is. So the retention piece is huge. And I think it was somebody from either the Lincoln Journal Star or the Omaha World Herald. They put out a stat and really tracked these past recruiting classes. And it was unbelievable how many of the 4-stars are gone.
Right.
Yeah. So it is, it goes hand in hand with coaching transitions, but then also retention. So a lot of factors facing against Nebraska there, but the development itself can be improved. And so, yeah, I think, huge upgrade at quarterback. You think how many of those games last year would have been flipped had Raiola been there a year prior and maybe cut down some turnovers and one score losses. So veteran offensive line, you touched on that, 4 out of 5 back and very veteran. What else? The receiver core, what I like about them, it might not pop off the page on a national scale, but I like that they have a lot of specialty guys like the speedsters from the slot that can take the top off the defense. A former near 5-star with Coleman entering his second year. Banks, I already mentioned, is on the all-transfer team from the Big Ten. And then Fedoni, I think that people need to – you guys know all about him, but Big Ten fans and national guys, they need to get on this because he's going to be one of the top tight ends in the country this year. He made my second team all Big Ten, and he's got a huge ceiling there. So look for offensive improvement.
Yeah, Carter Nelson's another one, too, that is a tight end, came in as a tight end, in-state kid, 8-man football player. Was the top recruit in the state of Nebraska, could have gone to Georgia and all the other schools. And
I like Emmett Johnson as a running back, too. And the reason, one of the differences is if we have competent play at the quarterback position, and we're able to move the ball a little bit that way, they won't be able to. He ran pretty well when everybody knew we were going to run. I thought he came in and did pretty well. So if we actually could get some balance, it's just hard to assess our running back position. It's really hard.
Well, we talked all off season. We just weren't capable of doing it enough. But the idea of, can you take the top off the defense? Can you force the defense back a little bit?
Right.
We were trying to run against teams that knew we were going to run all the time. And to your point there, Brett, just what we saw even in a little bit of the spring game, Raiola is so comfortable and throws such a nice ball there. And we've got some guys that can take the top off, whether it's Lloyd now coming into his second season, Malachi's there, but Nair, the transfer from Texas, or then you have, Banks there. We've got guys that can stretch the field differently. It's a really interesting room. And then Fedoni is a guy, I think you have Fedoni as a second team all conference player. Fedoni had a really good season last year, and that's just him making it through a season without injury after 2 back-to-back knee injuries. It was so good to see him.
That was huge.
Just
That's
play
a
that
humongous part of his next year is that he actually got to finish the season, have an off season.
Absolutely.
And now we're going to see how it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think look for more improvement from the defense. It was already really strong, a top 20 unit for me, top 10 rushing defense. But you get the 2 big guys in the middle back with Robinson and Hutmacher, the polar bear, as I call him. It's easier to pronounce.
It is.
I agree.
But, if there's one area that's a question mark, it might be linebacker, losing those 2 big-time veterans, Reimer and Henrik. But you're trading some size for speed with the new guys coming in, Wright and Bullock. They got a lot of time last year. They're veterans now at this point. And then look for Stephen Thompson. He could have made my all-transfer team too as a linebacker, just because he has so much experience in White's system from Syracuse. So that'll help. That'll go a long way. So I see a really strong defense, an offense that has to get better in the pass game. It will get better, and it could even flip to an asset in some spots. So all that to say, it's definitely a second-year bonus for Rule as expected, and I think you're going to start to see some of those dividends.
Husk guys here, you were on their show last week, Brett. GBR, 3 of the smartest minds in college football in one podcast. Love to see it.
There we go. Thanks, Husk guys.
Appreciate that, Husk guys. You
Husk
mentioned
guys have been drinking.
Yeah, you mentioned
there's one for
there's
sure.
one of the smartest guys, and then 2
he's just seeing double, and that's why
the Husk guys are fellow Boston College alumni like me. So we'll
there you go. There you go, man. You mentioned Tony White there, and we were having some fun earlier with Kirk Ferentz there. You talked with Kirk Ferentz over the offseason. You also talked with Tony White. He was the Nebraska coach that you talked with. Tell us a little bit about that conversation. What was Tony White like on the phone? How'd that go?
Yeah, so I talked with Tony White 2 cycles ago, actually. He's still on the page there. He was at Syracuse, and I had noticed him because their stats were popping off the page defensively at a program you wouldn't expect it. This was Syracuse. They weren't even a bowl team back then, and they were struggling. But the defensive stats look good. I wanted to learn about this 3-3-5. Not many teams are running it. So he explains a little bit of the X's and O's, the way they trade some size for speed, just try and throw an outlier at these offenses, similar to an option team where it's hard to prepare just once a year for something like that. It's a different kind of scheme. So that helped. And then, not that this was a conversation with him, but I always listen, podcasts all across the country as part of my research. And I can almost tell the quality of a coordinator based on the fan base's reaction when he leaves. And I'll tell you, when he left Syracuse, they were in full meltdown mode. Their fans, their media, because they appreciated what they had with Tony White. And when he departed for Nebraska, they were in shambles. So that was the writing on the wall for last year, and he certainly lived up to it. Top 20 defense, top 10 rushing, like I said, and did that in a transitional team, transitional season. So yeah, really smart mind. He also had a chance to go coach for his alma mater this cycle. UCLA opened up surprisingly late in February with Chip Kelly's departure, and White being a UCLA alum. There was a shot that he could have gone and taken the head coach spot. I wonder if that was in the cards. I know Nebraska did a nice job boosting his contract and keeping him there in Lincoln. And you never want to guess a guy's career goals. We don't know if he wants to be a head coach yet or what. But I thought that was a huge win for Rule to retain him. Given he could have gone.
Absolutely. In fact, I want to bring up this quote that was in the magazine. Nebraska and Notre Dame have to recruit coast to coast, while Miami and USC can walk around the block and pick up 20 blue chippers. And that, do you remember where that quote was? That from a coach?
That's me. Yeah.
Was that your quote? Okay,
yeah, because I like to talk. Every program has a different strategy with recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it's geography based. National brands have to go coast to coast, but yeah, that's in there on the recruiting page, I think. Well,
and the reason why I brought that quote up at that point was talking about Tony White and Nebraska. Look, it's not Kool-Aid for me. It is. I'm just this believer that this program, it's important. When Coach Rule was on the Joel Klatt podcast, he talked about from a regionality standpoint that, the Midwest and Nebraska, I mean, we've got to be good. It's important. It's important for college football to have powers from this part of the country. And I absolutely believe Nebraska can be that. But we're never going to be that by just going out and getting 5-star kids left and right, because they're not right outside our door. It's what we have to do is we have to retain kids, and we have to develop. We have to be that program. And we weren't for so long. We've seen it with the 70th out of 70 stats that you've had. That's been our bugaboo the whole time, to keep the players that we've talked about keeping. How we've gotten old in the trenches by not losing players that had NFL grades, Ben Scott and Bryce Benhart and Nash Hutmacher and Ty Robinson, but also to not lose Tony White. That was so key. Like, to have some development, some year over year. There was
that second year bonus.
There was a stretch.
Yeah, there you go.
There was a stretch of about 10 years. I think I read like on an ESPN article one time. This is somewhere from about 2010 to 20. Nebraska was like number 2 in the country in dead money. We paid out the second most amount of money to people to no longer be here, whether they were head coaches, assistant coaches, ADs, just didn't matter. We
are on the worst list now.
My point behind that was that it was, the answer isn't always just to fire your way out of it. If firing your way out of issues was the answer, then Nebraska would be the national champ 10 times over.
Right.
And it's what I love and appreciate about what Coach Rule is doing right now is as a Husker fan, I feel like I'm seeing something getting developed, something getting built upon, something. Hey, last year we were pleasantly surprised by Tony White and the black shirts. Okay, this year I expect to see something better. And he talked about that in media days with, it was a good defense, but we didn't get enough turnovers. We only had 14 turnovers on defense. We had 31 on offense, way too many there, -17. How are you losing games as close as we're losing when you're -17 in turnovers? So how do you answer that? Get the 5-star quarterback on offense, play better on offense, don't turn it over. But on defense, we need to at least get 20 this year.
Yeah.
And it's building upon something. And that's what I'm so – dude, I mean, you mentioned how you love this time of year, Brett, because, you've built up for this. Mac and I are the same way. I mean, this is the greatest time of the year for us because us guys, it's the greatest time for them too. I mean, like all I see is the positive. All I see is the positive right now. I just see the positive.
If the shoe fits, we are definitely that. We have compiled so much good news that it's almost unbearable. But it does appear different. I just feel like when you watch Rule handling things, and I've talked to Honk about this before, but it just seems like all of Nebraska's vast resources have been fully activated and pointed towards success. And like, maybe I didn't feel like that for the longest time. Like, it just seems like the recruiting is operating on a super organized
NIL
level. NIL is going to that level. Our facilities are up to that level.
Our facilities are second to
the
that.
Coach is making the rounds. He's on he's on Pat McAfee, when he's available to it. The YouTube thing they're putting out is a little above and beyond. It's just things that Nebraska was always willing to do for whatever coach would just say, this is what we got to do. I feel like we finally got sort of the CEO we needed in there with a vision to put this thing back on the right track.
Yeah, no, it certainly feels that way. And he's a builder. So I think you're going to start seeing dividends. And I really think that had White left, that could have been a setback. That might have been stalling the rebuild a little bit more, but
agreed.
That's almost as big as the Raiola. I mean, if not,
it really is.
It's hard to compare, but it's on the same tier of importance, because now it was already a strength last year on defense. Now it's really something to build a top 25 caliber team around. So
and gives them a chance to teach those assistant coaches for one more year. If someone's going to get promoted within, or they're going to, it just pays dividends to get him that one more year. You're so right. That's a big. And we won't even know the full impact of it till the end of the year, but it has a big impact.
Well, we got one more question here, and then Brett, we're gonna go to parting shots. And dude, first off, I love talking to you. We could talk to you all night.
Yeah.
Frankly, we gave too much.
And Redcasters out there, Redcasters, seriously, go to pick6previews.com, purchase the magazine. Brett, tell them every way to purchase it and give them all that information here. But Redcasters, go and do it. This is it's the top of the top.
Yeah, well, thanks for the praise there. It was great meeting you guys out in Lincoln a couple seasons ago. I was there for the Oklahoma game. Pick6previews.com is the only place to get the magazine. And this year we have the hard copy back again and the digital PDF option. I'm old school. I like getting that hard copy, bring it to the beach, have it on the coffee side table during the season, mark it all up. Yeah, there it is. Thanks, Honke. So yeah, hard copy. If you buy the hard copy, you also get the digital PDF emailed to you. So you get both. And yeah, great to be back again. 13th year for Pick Six Previews, looking to defend the 10-year title again. Again, it's all 70 Power 5 teams, a one-man show. I'm talking to head coaches, coordinators, listening to local podcasts, spring games, practice reports, you name it. I'm addicted to getting all the detail, all the data, and putting it into a readable format. So most change ever this offseason. I know we say it a lot, but really this year with the conferences and the expansion of the playoff, it's the most ever. So yeah, great to be back. And that's where you get the book, pick6previews.com.
That's awesome. Boomer, can you post that last question, and then we'll hit to the parting shots there. So do you expect the defense, the Huskers, the Black Shirts, to maintain the 2023 level of effectiveness, or will Big Ten OCs be able to adjust with a year of experience facing a 3-3-5?
That's a great question. I think with the high level of returning production that they're going to be able to offset any kind of scheme gains from opposing coordinators. So I would say that they're going to hold serve there in the top 20 of my defensive numbers, and that'll definitely be strong enough to get them on that side of the ball back to bowl season and contention. So yeah, I think they're going to offset any kind of scheme gains with their returning production and a gain of their own. So and real quick, we didn't get to talk schedule, but I do want to throw in here. Quick.
Go for it. Oh gosh, yeah.
This is one of the most unbalanced schedules in terms of first half and second half, where you might have your 7 easiest opponents your first 7 games. And it's rare to see that. I think they're going to be favored in all 7 of those games too, because the only road trips are Purdue and Indiana, who I have tied in dead last in the Big Ten. So, now it's a matter of winning the games and getting those W's. But the way I see it shaking out, UTEP, Colorado will be a tough one, but that's a night game. Getting them earlier than you're used to facing. I mean, it's usually that Thanksgiving weekend, but that's going to be electric in Lincoln. I think they win that one. FCS game. Illinois, I have towards the bottom. It's not one of their better Illinois teams this year. They lose their defensive line, which was keeping them afloat. We talked Purdue and Indiana being at the bottom. And Rutgers is a tough team, but you get them in Lincoln. So I really see a 7-0 start. That might sound like some Kool-Aid, but I see 7-0. Probably a loss in Columbus. Your 24-point dogs out there.
Sure.
It's a super team. So 7-1. And I like the game against UCLA being in Lincoln. It's a transition season for them, a coaching change. They didn't really supplement themselves from the portal like we would have expected. So I see what would that be? 8-1 start.
It's an 8-1 start, yeah.
8-1 going into the second bye, heading into the last 3 games. Then it goes downhill a little bit. I have a loss at USC. I have a coin flip game with Wisconsin going to the Badgers, and then a loss at Iowa. So 8-1 start, 8-4 finish. I think you take 8-4. That would get you back to bowl season, maybe even a top 25 ranking somewhere in there. Definitely a ranking if you're 7-0. It could be top 15, top 10 ranking at the time. But that's where I have it shaken out. It's kind of a roundabout roller coaster way to get to 8-4, but that's where I see it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad. I can't believe I forgot about the schedule piece of this, but this was something that we talked about in our season opening show last week. Was, first off, I just kind of said, to me, I don't want to say there's no excuse, or that sounds so harsh, but I just really feel like by the end of the 7th game, I'm even giving us a loss. You have us at 7-0. I'm even saying 6-1. You have a bad week. We really need to be bowl eligible, I think, by the end of 7 games for a number of reasons, to show that progress being made, but also that, we've done this show for 7 years. We've never seen a bowl game. And getting that bowl game is so crucial. You just got to get that monkey off the back. It seemed like last year we had, we got to 5-4, and 5-3, and we had 4 games left, and we ended up losing 3 of them by field goals, 2 of them walk-off field goals, and we lose an overtime game. We just, the pressure was on every week to just get to 6, and it's just get 6, get that out of the way. Because the schedule lays out so similar to Husker fans as what 2016 did. We were 7-0 in 2016, and we didn't even know how good we were. We beat Oregon, but it wasn't a good Oregon team.
Yeah, it turned out.
And it wasn't until we played Week 8 against Wisconsin in 2016. We played Week 8 at Wisconsin, and we lost in overtime at Camp Randall. And in a loss, I felt we learned something about the team. I felt like, okay, I actually know something.
This isn't going to go well for the rest of the way.
I actually felt better. We were 7-1, but I was like, we had a good loss. Yeah. And the next week we had to go to Ohio State, who also played Wisconsin to overtime in Camp Randall that year. Mm-hmm. Okay, we did the same thing Ohio State did to Wisconsin in Camp Randall, except they won in overtime. We lost. Mm-hmm. I felt better after that loss, going in there at 7-1. And I can remember Dave and I flying out to Columbus, Ohio, talking on the plane. We had fans that were sitting next to us and listening and turning around and wanting to be part of our conversation. and I told people, I go, I don't know if we're going to beat Ohio State in 2016, but I go, I bet it's going to be a 4-quarter game. I feel that good about it now. And as we threw the interception on play 2 and it was picked off for a touchdown, it wasn't a 4-play game, let alone a 4-quarter game.
Such an annihilation.
And we lost 62-3, and it was the end of the Riley era that quick. My thought right now, I mentioned earlier, you said something about if Iowa went 10-2, could they get to a playoff? Dave and I, we actually had this conversation. It's somewhat tongue in cheek, but somewhat serious too. You go 7-0, like you said, and if Rule is doing what we hope Rule does, we go to Ohio State, and we don't win, but we don't lose 62-3. We play a competitive game, and we don't win. We come back. We beat UCLA. You said it was a toss-up game against Wisconsin. You know what? We win the toss-up for once. We finally, the thing goes our way. We lose at USC. And then, heck, we end the year like we did 2 years ago, winning at Iowa. That's 10-2. Now, I know that's pie in the sky, Kool-Aid Huskers talk there. But if we were 10-2 without a bad loss at Ohio State, without a bad loss at USC, these are competitive games. Is Nebraska potentially a team that could sniff the playoff? If Kirk Herbstreit said that Rutgers could sniff the playoff this year, could Nebraska sniff the playoffs if they were 10-2 under the scenario I just said?
I just love this every single time. Every single time we have Brett on,
every year
we'll let Brett tell us where he's got the Huskers slotted. He'll do a fine job of breaking down how he got there. And then Honke will take the next 5 or 10 minutes to paint the most sweet buttered up picture I could ever. Okay, you call that a coin flip, but let's just say we win that game. Come on, now that's 9 wins right there. That's nothing. We could probably. It's just every year we get to this part, and
I'll say though the bracket gets bigger and bigger, so it becomes more plausible. Your pie in the sky scenario. I mean, we're not talking 12-0 anymore. We're saying 10-2 is not that outlandish. I think on all seriousness, in your scenario, 10-2. Is in the discussion. Now it becomes a matter of where those other losses and the other conferences shake out, and they'll definitely be in contention. You would have to get some of those end up being ranked wins too. You might need some help from the teams you beat. It might sound counterintuitive, but say you beat a USC who's also a top 15 team, or if Iowa has a great run and finishes 9-2 or not 10-2 with you, but that's a good win for you. So a little bit of help from the schedule would help. You got to get some marquee wins in there. So
okay, I do have one other question for you then along those lines. This is a question that Dave brought up last week, and I thought it was a really good point on his part. In the past, we have said with Nebraska, when we're talking with you. We're like, there's this wide gap. Some years it was like, gosh, we could go 4-8 or 12-0, right? And anywhere in between. And Dave was like, I don't see that with this year's team. Some of this is the schedule and it's year 2 of rule, but it's like a wider, or it's a narrower gap. It's like we're probably 7-5 or 8-4 to your, and maybe 10-2, on top. So it's a fairly small gap as opposed to Colorado, where Dave lives out there in Denver, and Dave's like, he talks with people and they're like, Jesus, we could go 9-3 or we could go 12-0. We have no idea, this gigantic gap. But like Nebraska, do you kind of agree there that maybe the gap from floor to ceiling, it has narrowed from previous Husker years where we knew less?
Yeah, I think you're getting a little bit more predictable with the rule rebuild. I think you know where you're at, and I think you feel comfortable against the UTEP, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Indiana. Those games, Rutgers and UCLA should be wins. I think that it's a tighter band of results. I think it could be anywhere from 6 to 9 in terms of wins, and definitely bowl season. The Vegas win prop is 7.5. I think that's right on the head. I have them 8-4. But I mean, to your point, that's right there in that band of between 6 and 9. 10 would mean everything goes your way. I mean, in theory, yeah, it's possible. I mean, the only automatic loss on there is Ohio State, if you want to go that way. But I think the realistic outcomes, 6 through 9, maybe a 10th with everything going your right way and some breakout performers.
All right. Yeah, I can live with that.
God love you, Brett. I mean, I love it. I love this time of year. I love getting him on. We just showed the parting shots graphic there. I don't want to let you go, but you've also had a full day of doing this. We
gotta let it go.
we gotta let you go.
He's trying to have a nightcap.
Well,
I hope he's been drinking. I know I have.
I like this questioning from Anthony.
Anthony here. Can we get Brett Ciancia rant on Sue getting robbed on the Heisman? And Brett, we showed you this before we went live. We've got the graphic. Here it is. We're just going to let you go on a rant here, but Sue was just recently rated the number 1 player in college football since 2000. So the top player. Nice. I'm just going to shut up now. Go. Ran away, Brett. Have at it.
Well, I wish I had my Heisman ballot back in 2009 because I would have definitely voted for Sue. He was the most dominant player that year, the most dominant defender I've ever seen. Now, I am on the younger side, but still, in our generation, it's the most dominant player, either side of the ball, but definitely defender. What else? Yeah, here on the graphic, you see him. It's become my most popular tweet of all time. I mean, I do 70 Power 5 write-ups every year and all the radio and all the podcasts, but this one tweet comparing Ndamukong Suh's stat line to not just other players, but entire teams, entire defensive lines. He was a one-man wrecking crew.
That's
and then a personal note on it, I did get to see him live. And so this is right in the years where I was really getting into college football, my high school years, and where we live in Pennsylvania, there's not much around us in terms of college football. So the year before that, in 2008, we went up and saw Ohio State, Penn State to see Terrell Pryor versus Penn State at Happy Valley. But then the 2009 season, we're looking at a map and we're thinking this Nebraska-Virginia Tech game could be pretty cool. It's somewhat drivable. It's 5.5 hours, whatever. So we drove down there and I saw it, and it was a really dominant performance by Sue. Many broken up passes. He was getting in the backfield every play, and the offense gave him no help. I think it was 5 field goals. So and they lost 16-15 on a crazy ending. Even
Tyrod Taylor,
he was so good at his pass rush that it forced him out even further. So I got to see him live. It was special to be able to say that. Kind of a rare quirk that they're on the East Coast, and that was the game we went to. But and then of course from there it was just incredible season. The block kicks, the pick sixes, the stomping the Colorado quarterback. What else? Obviously the Texas performance that goes that should have won him the Heisman itself. And anyway, so that's my unprompted rant there by Anthony. Great question. I might have to fire that tweet back up again. I do it every Heisman night because it deserves to be remembered. That's one of the best of all time.
Well, we'll go through our parting shots, and we always give the final shot to our guest. But Mac, I'll start with you here. Parting shot.
Well, first, I just want to thank Brett for coming on again. It's always illuminating to talk to you, and I'm always interested in Honke's counter arguments to see where we can budge the number. So
how we can get more wins out.
It's fun every year. But you do such a great job, and I just love the story how you got to where you're going in life, and I hope other people realize what they can do when, like, if they're that dedicated to something, man, it's pretty impressive. On a side note, for me personally, the new NCAA football game is out. The defense is trash. Nobody can tackle. It's absolutely ridiculous. There is no defense that you can call to stop anything. It's either pick sixes or sacks. It's so stupid. No, but Brett, do you play that game at all, or have you seen it?
I haven't played it yet. I'm a couple systems behind, guys. I'm a PS3 kid, and
right.
I haven't upgraded since. So I might have to dust it off though and get back at it because I'm hearing great reviews. People, really, it's like a national movement all of a sudden. It's exciting for the sport.
Oh, and it's a great game. I mean, the defense is hard to play, but it is a great game.
Well, if you're a few systems behind, I don't even want to say where I'm at. I'm still playing Tecmo on NES, but of note,
not untrue.
When I so Brett, you sent me the actual printed version this week, but I live in rural Nebraska, and apparently, the snail mail is extra snail, so I didn't get it yet. So I had to print off a couple of the copies. Not at work because I don't want work to think I would be using printers for that. But
misuse of company property.
No, I would never do that. But I do want to note, and I don't know if you did this by intention or not, but if you want to print off just Nebraska in this year's Pick Six previews, you have to print off page 70 and 71. I don't know if that was any allusion, alluding to the national championship back-to-back years, Bob Devaney. Probably not. I'm sure it's just a crazy coinkydink there, but
awesome,
I think we need to move up that win total by a whole game now. After that, that's a good coincidence. I'm thinking 11-1 now. You're getting
11-1 is going to get us in there. I want to thank everyone, Redcasters out there. We're almost at 1,400 followers now, and considering that this is 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and the Huskers released 15 minutes prior to our show, and they announced it today.
That's a lot of late night drinkers.
Yeah,
I'm impressed. Well done.
We went up against the Star Wars of Husker, shows
right.
today with Chasing 3, and we've got 1,400 live watchers here an hour and a half into the show. Thank you so much. Everything that Brett said about Husker Nation is absolutely true, and we can't thank you guys enough for listening to this. Yeah. Tell all your friends about this show too, because this show is going to live out there here after the live version's done. And
this is a recording.
What Brett talking about here, I mean, this is good stuff here. This is stuff that I think when you want to come back in a couple of weeks and a game or two into the season, you want to listen back to some of the preseason thoughts. This is one of those shows that you'd want to go back to. Yeah. And my last parting shot here. I love college football, and Brett, you and I are we're like brothers from a different mother. When you came down to the Oklahoma game a couple years ago, and you called me up, it was that Friday, and I contacted Tyler Kyle, our buddy, and Mac, you were over there with me. We got Tyler, who's at the university, and he gets us gets you onto the field there. You and your fiance at the time.
Oh yeah,
and we walk out there on the field, and we just get to experience Memorial Stadium, and then the next day. Mac, you and I go to the game, and it didn't go the way we wanted the final score to go. But the 5-10 minutes prior to the game, the environment, and then that whole first quarter, Nebraska had the early lead against Oklahoma. There was the first game of Mickey Joseph as the head coach. And I remember you texting me the next day, Brett, and your text was, game didn't go the way you wanted, but you said, I've been to this stadium and this stadium, and you go, I haven't been to a better college football environment than that. Memorial Stadium hasn't lost a beat. We just need to win football games. Mm-hmm. If Nebraska's winning football games, Brett, that environment you experienced there for the 10, 15 minutes leading up to the game, that whole first quarter, I mean, that's my parting shot. I'll leave it to you, and you get to finish it. But I mean, what was that feeling like to you being right there? You had press passes, you're right on the sideline. What was that like at the end?
Oh yeah, well, first off, thanks to both of you for having me and all the praise and believing in Pick Six previews over the years. But yeah, I said it then, I'll say it again. Those first 5-10 minutes of that game were some of the best college football experience I've ever had. If you remember in that game, well, before the game even, I was getting goosebumps watching the intro, the marching band on the field. It's everything you'd want from a college football experience. It really felt like some old Americana even. And then the game starts, Nebraska scores first, and the place goes insane. That's louder than the 110,000 from Michigan for sure that I was there hearing that. And then I remember clearly, I think it was Dylan Gabriel ran some kind of crazy run down the field.
Like a third down,
missed all these, a lot of missed tackles, and got a little quiet from there. But even though, even on that drive, some third downs were really rowdy. All the fans throwing the bones in the stands, and So yeah, long story short, I love my trip to Lincoln. I really appreciated the fan base because it's so unified. I said this on the Husk Guys show, and I'll say it again, but where I'm from here in the Northeast, it's all about pro sports. Some people follow different sports. Like you have a Philadelphia Flyers fan who loves hockey and doesn't care about football, vice versa. Cowboys, Giants. It's just a mosh pit. But then you go out there and it's just everyone's on the same page. It's Husker football. What do you think the score is going to be? We're going to win. Right. Everyone's wearing red. And even like the support for the volleyball and the high school football teams, it's everything I would love. So felt at home out in Lincoln, and a lot of respect for the fan base. They, because I love a base that loves football as much as I do, college football specifically. And I found that with Nebraska. So any chance I get to talk with you guys, I appreciate it. And, I want to thank all the listeners and fans on Twitter. The listeners here, the listeners on Husk Guys, the listeners on 1620 The Zone. Damon Benning's show has been great. Character Chronicles, I know you guys, congrats, are affiliated there. There's so much of this Nebraska media apparatus. It's massive, but that's because the fans are there and they care and they love college football as much as I do. So mutual respect there with you guys. And hopefully it starts turning around. We talk blue bloods. These things are cyclical. So it ebbs and flows. It might have been a longer down cycle than anyone would have wanted there, but I think you're on the right trajectory up, and the fan support will always be there. And now you have a program developer there.
That's what
sounds great.
That's what I'm talking about. Redcast Abby said the same thing last week when she went to the Big Ten media days in Indianapolis. She talked about the media apparatus, the intent, the attention that Nebraska athletics has. I mean, we can just take over places, and God love you, Brett. I mean, I love this man right here. I'm giving you a virtual kiss too. It's college football. We may have had the best offseason we've ever had as a Redcast, and that was we took months off. I think we needed it a little bit. We've done it for 7 straight years, 500 episodes, and they just got to a point where we just need to take a little time off. And I'm fine. I'm rejuvenated now. Like I'm so pumped for football to start, and I'm so pumped that this was. I mean,
it's just like it's like a preseason magazine.
The talk with Brett. Yeah, that's the thing. We used to buy all these.
You're going to the magazine, right? Looking for like Brett Lindy's and Athlon. And it's like, this year, like we actually get to go talk to the guy. It's great.
I mean,
that's awesome. Yeah.
I'll leave you with this, Brett. But I mean, Mac and I have been buddies since 1990, and it was a off-season tradition back in 91 and 92 and 93. Nebraska's winning titles and all this stuff. Is that you go and you buy your national magazines, you buy Lindy's and Phil Stills, but we would buy Athlon and remember Bob Greasy. I mean, we would Street Smith. We would buy 10, 12. There were so many magazines,
and you had to get the
right now. There's one magazine that I want right now. It's Pick Six Previews, and the idea that we get to sit here and start every single preseason talking to the guy who's putting in that time.
Cool.
Like
that's pretty cool.
I don't know. That's just pretty cool.
Far more interactive than it used to be. This is better. I like this better.
Cool. Yeah. So Brett,
good luck to you guys this year, and I hope it's your best season yet. I mean, hopefully the wins on the field help with everything you're doing with your podcast. It's going to be huge for you. So good luck this year to you guys and the team.
All right.
Thanks, Brett.
GBR, and until next time, Matt's
Rule. Big Red Cats.
A Herd at Sports Network production.